Sasha, welcome to Wine the Valley.
Sheesh, thanks for having me. Excited to be
Yeah,
here.
man, it's been a
Yeah.
long time since we connected, and was very excited to hear, how you started Thrive, and you guys are growing like gangbusters. So want to jump right in. So I am a Thrive customer, and I my favorite snack is actually organic granola, Red Burst,
Great.
Berry Burst,
Yeah.
and which one is yours?
I'm a paleo snacks guy. It's the one that got like the nuts and plantain chips and like lots of salt and spice in there.
Yeah.
So I find that one pretty addictive. We've consumed just enormous quantities of it at the office over the years.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
even I love the lentil chips, man.
Yeah.
Like that's one of my favorite. So after you graduated from
Yeah.
Stanford, I saw that you went to Stanford for computer science and
Yeah.
economics.
Yeah.
And so after you graduated, you worked at Microsoft, right?
Yeah.
Like for close to 8 years or
Yeah.
so. And I also see that like before you started Thrive, you were also like trying a bunch of other things,
Yeah.
right?
Mhm.
And I would love to know, like after Microsoft, why did you decide to try or like embark upon the startup journey?
Sure. So it's interesting. So when I came to college, entrepreneurship is always something that I wanted to do as a living. I wanted to educate myself to be qualified to do it. And Stanford didn't really have a business degree or something that really qualifies you to go run a company directly in its undergrad programs. So I thought kind of a combination of computer science to learn technology and economics to understand how the financial world works is kind of a good blend. So I ended up doing that. Um, I came into college in '99 when we were at the height of the first dot-com boom, and all the sort of sophomores and juniors were coming off these amazing internships at companies. You know, by the time I was actually recruiting, the bubble had burst, and the only companies that were actually hiring at any scale were large enterprise. So Microsoft was one of those, and ended up getting an offer and went up there, and it was just an amazing experience, right? In building good fundamentals and seeing what it was like to see software developed at just massive scales. And this is one of the few companies that's serving at the time billions of customers, not just millions. So that was a real education, and that kept me just super engaged for a period of time because there were great growth opportunities, and there's a lot you can learn in the early parts of your career from a company where they've built a lot of the technical foundations. They've also built a lot of the cultural principles that are important for anyone who wants to come run a business.
Mm.
But there's sort of a ceiling on that, right? Like after a while, the pace of your learning slows down a little bit. And my sort of dream career wise is always to get out there and implement my own bad ideas. So when I got the chance, it was a few years in, to come work with a buddy of mine who was a former venture capitalist out here in LA, who was leaving his firm to start a business in the fashion technology vertical. I sort of reflected that sort of now or never. If I was still at a point in my life and my career where I could take some risks and I could always come back and
This was like when you moved from Seattle to SoCal?
yeah, this was back in 2011. So
Okay.
I spent 8 years, 7.5, 8 years in Microsoft, and then in early 2011, I came down here to LA because
Mm.
there was three business partners. Two of them were located here in LA. LA was sort of a hub for fashion technology in
Mhm.
general, so it made sense for us to locate the business here. So I moved on down. Knew more or less nothing about running a company, knew certainly nothing about fashion, but we made it work, and launched the business, scaled into a couple of rounds of venture funding, got to some scale. Ended up acquiring another company, running that joint business. We ended up pivoting it into a marketplace for fashion products, which then ended up getting acquired by yet another LA area fast fashion company. So it's a pretty wild journey, and like kind of very much an education in the early stages of building a startup. And so, that put me in mid 2014 looking to see what I wanted to do next. Sort of knew at the time that fashion probably was not the right vertical for me. I wanted to work on something where I was going to be my own consumer and have just kind of greater empathy with the end user. And I want to work on something that had the potential for impact, which was real, and also the potential for real scale. Like the business we built was really interesting, but it ended up being more of a niche business than I wanted to be involved in long term. So, ended up spending a summer just sort of networking furiously, which was something I'd never really spent a lot of time doing before. So it was like probably the most exhausting summer of my life, like taking meeting after meeting after meeting. But it was super rewarding because I got to meet, probably,
But did
50
you
plus.
know, like after your last startup, you wanted to do another startup?
Yeah. So after the first one, I was pretty sure I had at least one more at bat in me. So, I wanted to, but I was a little smarter about it, right? Like I knew what I wanted with more precision. I knew I wanted to work on something that had scale and impact. I knew I wanted to work with serial founders who'd kind of been through the grind and hopefully seen success and figured out what worked at least once. And I wanted to work in a domain that I was more personally passionate about. So that's what brought me to Thrive was, just talking to tons and tons of folks. I got introduced to my business partners here through a mutual friend who ran an LA area accelerator. And, it just checked all the boxes, right? Like the founding team, like was all like pretty new to knowing each other. So we all got along really well. And it was, everyone had a seat at the table. And yeah.
And what was like the first idea of Thrive? Was it exactly what you guys are doing now, or what was it when you
The
started?
mission was always the same. So the mission was always to make healthy living accessible, to make it affordable to as broad a population as possible. The initial execution, or not execution, the initial idea for how it would work was conceived by Gunnar, who's the original sort of founder with the idea behind Thrive, which was based on his experience growing up in a communal farm in Ojai, California. And at this communal farm, they would buy natural products in bulk as a community. And as a result, were able to get price breaks that made the product affordable in a way that wouldn't have been if they'd had to go to, a traditional health food retailer or something and buy it retail. So he was obsessed with this idea of how can we bring the power of group buying to this category. And the initial idea was a kind of a group buying club, so sort of like a Groupon for healthy living, where there'd be these deals that go live, and then people buy the deal and it drops and then finally ships. That idea sort of died on the vine because it wasn't really a suitable way to buy groceries. Like people aren't going to want to wait 2 weeks for this deal to come together and like finally get shipped out. So the model then evolved to the point where it was, how do we use the power of this community? And the model was really on a membership community for healthy living. So the original sort of company pitch was kind of Costco meets Whole Foods online. So this idea of group buying club membership community focused on the healthy grocery vertical. So that version stuck. That's what we ended up launching the business, and it's essentially been the premise and the dynamic ever since. So that's how things evolved.
And the first version of Thrive, right? Like, was it all online? And what were some of the early days, especially that the first year, right? It's was it selling food online, or was it something different?
No, the core premise of the business has not really changed since the day we launched. So we are still online only, direct to consumer only, US based only. That focus, I think, has been a good thing for us, given kind of the plethora of sort of shiny objects that are to explore in the space, because it's just an enormous market. And the direct to consumer model, particularly for consumer packaged goods, is where the world is increasingly going, where consumers want to be connected more directly to the brands that they're engaging with, and we have the opportunity to bring real scale and leverage with a curated catalog and centralized distribution to get this product to every household in the country in a way that a traditional retailer or an offline model, it would take a lot more capital and a lot more time to scale out. So this has always been the most efficient way for us to drive towards our mission. I think what's evolved over time is the scope of the products we carry. So when we launched the business, we focused on what are called the center aisles of the grocery store. So all the non-perishable product that you'd find on the shelves. Those represent, I think, just under 45% of people's grocery shopping dollars, and obviously are a lot easier to procure, warehouse, and fulfill than fresh product, frozen product, things that are more fragile or perishable. So we started with that. And then we've expanded out to carry a pretty robust assortment of high quality frozen products, so meat, seafood, anything you'd find in the freezer aisles, whether it's sort of, frozen meals, pizzas, ice cream, all that kind of stuff is now available on the Thrive Market platform. We've expanded into alcohol by selling organic and biodynamic wines on the platform. So our long-term vision is to be as close to a complete solution as possible for our members' needs. We also carry stuff outside of food. So anything you would think of in or around your household. So non-toxic cleaning supplies, bath and body products, clean beauty products, pet supplies, and so on. That's all within our wheelhouse.
And how big Thrive has become. And even before that, like one of the big thing I would say is, which I was so impressed, which you guys took a big step last year of converting into a B Corp, right? And that is such an integral part of what you do. And I would love to know more about the mission, of Thrive today.
Yeah. So the mission, and again, it's never changed. And it's one of the things that's been just a really powerful constant as we've grown the business, is to make healthy and sustainable. I think sustainability has come to the forefront, but it's to make healthy and sustainable living easy, affordable, accessible to as many families as possible. And the B Corp certification is a way we can really reaffirm our commitment to that. And the exciting thing about it is, like, these are all practices, like most of the practices that we're embarked upon today were ones that we baked into our process from the very early days of the business. So, we embarked upon carbon neutral shipping from the day we launched the business, like, because we thought it was the right thing to do. When we started to scale up our fulfillment centers, we committed to making them zero waste because it was the right thing to do from our perspective. We always, just when you look at the commitment broadly to organic agriculture, a lot of it's around sustainability, right? It's the health aspects are critical, but it's also, how do we make sure there are still harvests in our future for our children and our children's children? What's been exciting as we've scaled is to find all those initiatives that we did just because we thought they're the right thing to do, actually yielding benefit for us as a business. So an example being the zero waste fulfillment efforts that we put in are actually financially ROI positive for us as a company. Our investment in carbon neutral shipping, our customers ask us about that as much as they ask us about free shipping today. So, by doing the right thing, we're getting rewarded by a conscious consumer who wants to vote with their dollars and transact with a brand and a company that resonates with their values. So that's been the really exciting part of this to see at scale. We'd have done it anyway because we've always believed in this idea of building, stakeholder driven businesses that kind of go beyond just shareholder value to consider all stakeholders around us, right, including the environment.
Yeah. So how do you balance sometimes, when you are going for sourcing snacks or food this way, right? It can sometimes elevate the cost of the food, right? And so how do you manage customer expectation on pricing and the demand for environmental conscious food?
Yeah. So one of the key parts of our approach is around curation. So, quality is always going to be first. So, we only select a very small percentage of the brands that want to participate on the Thrive Market platform. And, we carry, I think, less than 6,000 products today. It's always a much smaller, more curated, targeted assortment than you'd find at the average grocery store. And that has a number of benefits, right? A, from a quality perspective, we can be very selective. B, we're buying deeper into every single SKU and investing more in every single brand that we do onboard onto the platform, which translates into better pricing that we can then pass on to our members. We are a membership-based platform, so we charge the equivalent of $5 a month. It's a $60 annual fee. That allows us to kind of maintain a significant profit center within our business and then subsidize product sales to the point where our product sales are not our sole source of profitability. We have the ability to really pass on as much of that value as possible to our consumers.
Yeah. Going back now to 2014 timeframe when you were starting, like how back then the consumer trend and behavior were a lot different than today, right? Back then, people were less aware. I think the need to buy organic was kind of less. And, Whole Food was also there. So what did you identify as a gap in the market, which led you to like, you know what, this is our mission and this is what we want to launch?
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, since 2014, to your point, I think mainstream awareness of the importance of natural organic has definitely grown. However, even back in 2014, it was an enormous market, right? So organic grocery is, I believe, about 50 billion a year. CPG as a category is 2 trillion a year, and organic's the fastest growing segment. E-commerce is also the fastest growing segment. So, for a new business launching back then, the nice thing is like you still had an amazingly large addressable audience. And to your point, there weren't as many options out there for those folks. So we saw 3 barriers getting in the way of people's ability to really participate in this category. So the first is price. So natural organic products tend to be sold at a premium to conventional products that have more processing, more chemicals. That price premium is anywhere from 25 to 50%. So if you think about a Whole Foods or another premium health-oriented grocery store, it's typically the top 5% of your population that's going to be able to afford to shop there on a habitual basis. So our first mission is, okay, how do we get the price down to the point where, our sort of North Star is it should be the same pricing as conventional. Whether we can sustain that long term or not is unclear, but it certainly should be dropping the price materially so that it's more affordable to a broader range of the population. Second is geography. So even if you can afford the product, there may not be local options that are conveniently available. So for example, 23 million Americans live in what are called food deserts, where you're more than 10 miles driving distance to any kind of real healthy grocery store. So for these folks, there needs to be a solution that makes it convenient enough where they can get these products in their day-to-day. And this is where the direct-to-consumer e-commerce fulfilled national footprint model really pays dividends, where we can hit every household in the lower 48. So whether you're in a major urban area or out in the countryside, we can still get product to you. And that level of convenience is critical to be able to help people shift their habits or really onboard onto this category in a sustainable way.
Okay.
And the last level is education. So even if you can afford the product, even if you can find it easily, there's just a ton of noise out there in the health space around, what's good for you, how should you think about your path to healthy living. So we've always done our best to pair up the commerce with content. So value add education and all information, on our blog, on our social media, on our sort of offsite marketing channels to help educate our members about the products they're buying, the stories behind the brands that we carry, and so on, so that they can form a full picture and really get comfortable using these products on a day-to-day basis.
And during the early time, right, when you shipped the first product, how did you get the first 1,000 customers?
Yeah, so it's this is like good startup lore. So we started our business in our first office was an old mechanic's garage. So it was about 25 or 3,000 square feet. Our first warehouse was in the center of this, and like corporate staff, such as it was, sort of scattered around the sides. So the day we launched, we all sat around a table. We all pulled out our Gmail contact lists, and we had this like carefully worded like launch email about this company that we've been working on that we hope you try. We're so proud to launch. So we emailed probably 5,000 people between like 10 or 20 of us, and we discovered that Gmail only lets you paste so many email addresses into the 2 line or the BCC line. So we launched to friends and family in October of 2014. That way, that was like our first 2 to 3 weeks of like, kind of working out like the kinks of being able to actually like take orders in the e-commerce site, fulfill orders, and so on. Our first public launch, and this is where things started to get interesting, was in November that year. And like that was sort of one of those moments that really clicked, because we've been working on this, but it was still pretty new. We had no idea if consumers were willing to pay for a membership to be able to access this class of product. And I remember we went live with an article on Refinery 29 in like early November of that year. This was like our official sort of launch. And that's a relatively mainstream audience. And I remember I was like visiting some friends. I was sitting up in Seattle at the time, and like, glued to like the Google Analytics like real-time counter, and you watch the traffic spike, and you see like the orders start to come in and the membership signups. I'm like, that was a real like, this is real.
You had membership back then too, right?
It was always a membership.
All membership.
It was membership from day one. And I think there's definitely other businesses that were sort of our vintage that moved away from it. For us, it's always been such a core part of what we do and such a strength to the business that it's stuck like that. That notion's just never been challenged. It's like practically sacred at this point.
In the first, like, let's say first 2-3 years, right? What were some of the moments when you were like, and this may not work out, or was it, you could always see this would always work out?
I think as an entrepreneur, you always believe it's always going to work out. And look, like we've been very fortunate, right? Like we experienced, for better or worse, hypergrowth right out of the gates. Like, and if anything, like we had to be very thoughtful about, kind of engineering the first year or so of growth and kind of keeping it under control, because there's a very strong physical goods component of the business that can get dislocated very quickly. It doesn't scale infinitely the way digital technology does. Like I can buy more servers, like we can't hire 100 people overnight to fulfill orders. So, I think we hit 100,000 members. Some of those stats that'll probably be corrected, but around 12 months into our process, which was far ahead of some of like our touchstones for growth at the time. So, it grew very, very quickly with very limited paid marketing in the early days, if any at all.
So how were people knowing about Thrive at that point in time?
So it was a lot of, it was and continues to be a lot of word of mouth. We also were fortunate enough, a lot of our early capital was raised from thought leaders and influencers in the health and wellness space. So, in the very early days pre-launch, like we didn't have like a ton of luck raising traditional venture capital. So we went out to the communities that already had audiences that we knew this message resonate with. And we were discussing what we were trying to do, and like all these folks were getting so excited. So, we started convincing some of them to write checks, and like that was a lot of early seed capital. The beauty of that is like they also doubled as marketing partnerships for us come launch, where they could promote the product, and they had audiences that were passionate and in many ways sort of tailor-made for our offering. So, that continues to be one of our major sources of customer acquisition, and a key part of the stickiness and community feel around Thrive.
What were some of the experiments like which worked really well or failed like early on, right? Was it in anything, right? Whether it was building team, product, business, anything, throughout the journey?
Yeah, it's interesting. So we've definitely tried and had a lot of things not work. One of the things that I think is we're exciting about startup culture, and I think the environment we've built is just not having a fear of taking some risk, even if the risks are significant. So, one of our touchstone goals over time is to be able to provide a fresh product solution to our members. We test drove that out of a fulfillment center in 2016. Just didn't work from a logistical standpoint. Consumed a fair bit of organizational resource, but it's something we were able to ring fence. So, that's one example of something where, we've learned a ton from that experiment, and we will get back to it at some point. But first execution, just no way we were able to scale it. Similarly, we've tried a lot of different tactics around customer acquisition, and we always want to be able to balance the quality of the experience to provide members with, the volume and efficiency with which we can bring them in. A number of those things just don't work. But overall, like what we're really focused on is, really reinforcing that test and learn culture, right? The team runs, I think well over 100 experiments a year on the digital customer experience. And, for anyone who does a lot of experimentation, like the majority of these fail, right? So you have great hypotheses and high hopes, but a lot of stuff doesn't work. And we want to encourage that thinking, because the truth of this is business, you only need to find a few big wins amongst all this for it to all be worthwhile. But that willingness to experiment, take risks, and innovate is really, I think, what differentiates companies that are going to be adaptable and be able to kind of roll with the punches and grow and take advantage of changing circumstances.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, one of the things I've heard Vinod Khosla say is like, failures don't matter, but success do, right? So when you hit those big tipping points, like it can, make your company like 3 times bigger, and then you're totally in a different like zone, and then you're building on top of success and so on and so forth. So when switching gears a little bit, like into the product. So if you
Yeah.
look at how Thrive Market has evolved over the years, right? Like you have the web, you have the mobile, and it, from design standpoint, right? Like what is the journey, on how you design things, and like obviously we worked with you guys, for some time on designing stuff, and obviously Thrive Market has won so many awards, right? Like with Fast Company and so on and so forth. Why do you think that has happened? Like why the product is winning?
I think it's a combination of being it's a combination of having great talent. So I think everything starts with that. So that's been one of the areas that I've felt most fortunate in terms of my journey here at Thrive, is just the caliber of folks we've been able to attract and retain, and the quality of the work the team's been able to do. So that's foundational. Beyond that, we're willing to experiment. We're very data driven. We look to our customers for insight, but we're not necessarily just building exactly what they ask. We're looking for their explicit feedback, but also looking for implicit signals in terms of what actually drives, that bullseye in the Venn diagram between customer value and business value. And we're going to invest into that intersection over and over again. So, understanding where we need to take the customer journey based on a combination of, insights from our analytics, our business goals, what we're seeing out there in the external environment, and then also being laser focused on getting qualitative feedback from customers, what parts of the experience are working and what's not working, and using that to drive, every iteration of the product, right?
Talking about teams, right? Like over the pandemic, how pandemic has changed the culture at Thrive?
Yeah, it's interesting. So we were fortunate in that, at least in the technology org, we were already starting to become an increasingly distributed team. You guys probably know, like, great tech talent is a global phenomenon now, and there's a huge competitive advantage to being able to hire folks regardless of their geography. So that was an area where, on tools, process, and people, we'd already made a number of investments. So the transition to getting a team to be able to be at its most collaborative, most effective, in the midst of a pandemic early on was easier than maybe other businesses had to go through, because of all the pre-work that had been done. So, from a team dynamic perspective, post-pandemic, that trend has only accelerated. We now have team members in over 15 countries. We've really been committed to creating a great work environment and culture, regardless of geography. So, and it's been in some regards, it's been a challenge, right? Like we had corporate offices, and we've previously relied, pretty heavily on in-person presence for the softer side of the business to connect people to the mission. So, it's been a very intentional priority of our leadership team to make sure that we replicate as much of that as possible in an online forum, so that, even if you join Thrive today and, are, not geographically situated around other Thrivers, and your interactions are largely over Zoom calls, we still want people to feel connected. We want people to be able to connect their day-to-day work to our mission. We want them to be able to experience, the power of the brands we carry and the impact we're having in communities. And it's definitely tougher when you do it remotely, because you don't have that.
How do you do it remotely? Like at this point, I'm not sure how many members are there in Thrive Market today. And I say members, like team members.
Yeah.
And how do you kind of connect, everybody when you're hiring, across different countries and so on and so forth?
I think it starts, and again, this is one of the things that we're lucky about. Like, we've always had a culture of transparency from day one. So we talk through our numbers, our business challenges, our opportunities in as public a manner as we can. So, for example, there's a weekly meeting that is open to the entire company where we go through, kind of department by department, wins, challenges, opportunities, review the sales numbers the past week. We talk about kind of impediments and sort of solution in a very public way. We host all hands meetings in addition to those, where we're able to bring in folks from our community, brand partners, mission partners, to be able to present to our entire audience. We focus a lot on leadership training to be able to make sure that, managers, especially new managers, but even tenured managers, are balancing kind of day-to-day business execution with making sure their teams are in healthy standpoint. There's no silver bullet to this stuff. Um, it's doing everything you can, and like the truth of it is sometimes you're not going to get amazing positive feedback on everything you do, but you sort of stick to it and rinse and repeat until it works.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And if you look at like how pandemic has changed consumer behavior, like what have you seen?
Yeah, so it's sort of gone through phases. Obviously in the very early stages of the pandemic, we were seeing, a lot of the same sort of, stockpiling and panic buying that other consumers are seeing. There was a point where it was very valuable for us to be a membership business because it did create a little bit of, positive selection bias in terms of the net new consumers we brought on. These were people who are authentically interested in healthy living versus just like looking for any online source for toilet paper that was available. I think the biggest shift has been the rapid acceleration of people considering buying grocery and CPG online. So coming into 2020, I think something in the range of 3 to 5% of American households like had ever bought consumer packaged goods or grocery products from an online retailer. The brick and mortar retailers still account for probably 95, 98% of sales. By the summer of 2020, I think that number had accelerated to somewhere between 30 and 50%. And Google surveyed customers about their purchasing patterns, and a resonant theme was that if consumers had a positive experience with the online brands they interacted with, they were planning to to continue to purchase through those channels, and some of that habit shift would be permanent. Obviously, as the world hopefully goes back to as close to whatever our new normal is, some of people's habits will revert to offline, but this is not a category that requires explanation anymore. At this point, anyone and everyone has bought groceries online. It's no longer something where we need to provide that context to prospective new members and what it is we do. So that shift, I think, is permanent, and that's probably one of the most foundational things for our category that's really changed. Other things we saw were this came up in customer survey data. The importance of trust in that relationship between the consumer and the retailer is more important now than ever, right? So, with people's concerns about, health is at everyone's forefront. So, for us in particular, we saw much stronger trend data in terms of, people's perception of us as a brand that they could trust for healthy living, and trust in our practices and our product to keep them healthy. So that was really validating. And, at its core, coming into the pandemic, it was really a moment for our mission, right? So we provided access and convenience for years. Now we're in a position where we really had to support people when, they needed this product. There were not as many alternate solutions available to them. So, really motivated our team to step up their game, and, probably the highest level of collaboration, execution, and commitment from our employee base that we ever saw. Just super, super proud of that.
There was a part during the pandemic when it just felt like the world is going to come to an end, right? I'm sure like you must have gotten crazy amount of order values at that point. What was kind of like one of the higher order values?
We've had a few. I mean, our fraud team definitely came to us and asked us like, why is there this like $15,000 order in the queue or something like that? So I mean, we like we flag anything over about $500 for at least a manual review. Turned out it was like totally legitimate. It was like somebody who lived out in the middle of nowhere and like was stocking their bunker presumably. But there were. I mean, there was definitely a people were stripping the shelves for a period of time, and it was really challenging because supply chains are obviously really disrupted at the time, and one of the things that we had to react quickly on is making sure that we were creating the right environment so that we could continue to provide as high a quality of service as possible to all our members, right? So so similar to what a lot of other retailers did, we did have to put caps on certain products. So you couldn't buy like normally you could buy up to 20 units or something. We had to restrict that stuff down. There was a short period of time where we even needed to put up store hours and like close our virtual storefront for a period of time just because, we weren't able to get orders out the door fast enough because of just how much demand had shown up. So, and that was another time when, really proud of how the team reacted, right? Because those are moments when you could take the orders, you could take the revenue or the cash anyway, and and kind of delay out those orders and impact your customer experience for short-term gain. Like it was never a question for us. Like, we slowed things down. We slowed down all customer acquisition. We turned off all our ads. Like everything changed to make sure that we were setting that right balance. So that the commitment we sort of made to our members was really honored. So, that was one that was, another sort of, very, very proud moment to see like how little ambiguity there was when you talk to even your marketing department about what the right thing to do is. So
yeah. And what tips or pointers you'll have to a CTO founder who's probably emulating your journey to some extent?
That's interesting. I think get used to the grind, right? I think it's one of those things where one of the constants, whether you're at the first month of a business or 7 years in, is there's gonna be as many bad days as good days. You're gonna be feeling like you're failing like 9 days out of 10, but you got to stick with it, right? And you got to not lose sight of your North Star vision, because not every day or every week, but every quarter or every year, you get to zoom out and like look at how far you've come. It's like climbing a mountain. Like every step sucks, but like you look back and you got a great view, and you look ahead and there's still more to conquer every time. So I think resilience is really important, and I think that's important for entrepreneurs, whatever your function or specialty may be. And I think it's really a lot of what differentiates those who can succeed and make this sustainable for themselves, and those who can't, right?
Yeah. So now we have come to the last segment, of our podcast, which has been requested a lot, by our audience. So I'll give you two options, and there's no right or wrong answer, and you can just, you can pick one, right?
Okay.
Almond milk or oat milk?
Definitely almond milk.
Okay. Lara bar or Kind bar?
Kind bar.
Okay. Experimentation or research?
Experimentation.
People or process?
Always people. Always people.
And the last one, Bezos or Musk?
That's a tough one. They're both touchstones. That one's hard to pick. I think I'll go with Bezos, and I'll explain why.
Yeah.
So it's interesting. Like we've got a lot of touchstones, and some of them come up over this conversation. So Whole Foods, John Mackey, conscious capitalism is a big motivator for all philosophies of business. Bezos and Amazon, absolutely another one. There's no one that I've seen in business that's had as strong and like maniacal a commitment to the long-term vision as Jeff. Like Nick and my business partner and I discussed this a lot. Like you can read his shareholder letters like way back in 1994, what they're trying to accomplish, and like that trend lasted for 20 plus years, right? And it's, as I think about like what drives our success, it's like we're successful when we take that long a view and just remain committed to it and do not ever deviate from that path for a short-term gain. So not exactly the company culture we're aiming to emulate in every regard, but in terms of that customer centricity and that long-term focus, I mean, there's no one like it.
Absolutely, man. Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. Well, that's pretty much the end of it. Sasha, cool. See you soon, man.
All right.
And hope the $15,000 order is still coming in.
They still keep coming in. We've got an auto ship product now. So whoever's ordering can get that every month if they want.
There you go.
All right, man.
See you. Have a good one.
See you guys.